What's good, guys? CJ here, and today we gotta take a look at another video from the homie Glaive Keo, and it's actually pretty interesting. I have no idea what it's about, but I know it's about Wuwa and its power balance. The title of the video is The Impossible Power Balance of Wuthering Waves, and I really want to see what he means by this, or overall what the topic of the video is. Now, recently, the only thing that could really strike my head regarding this particular topic is the dilemma between weapons, right? Do we want character signature weapons to be overpowered, or do we want them to be relatively balanced, or do we want them to be kind of mid, right? I honestly don't know. It's a very interesting topic of conversation. I know a lot of people have been talking about it. I know that when Frolova came out, the difference between Frolova and her weapon was pretty damn huge, and people were kind of mad. They were upset that Frolova didn't have a second really good option for her playstyle, and they were upset at that. Then when Augusta came out, her weapon was pretty damn close to other options that were already in the game, but people were also upset at that. So it's one of those scenarios where it could go either way, but it's hard to please the communities nowadays. So let's go ahead and see what the homie Glaive has to say.
A good deal and a bad one is always shifting, but every now and then a single item is released that forces an entire community to stop and ask, what are we actually paying for? And recently in Wuthering Waves, that item was the signature weapon for the new character Augusta. This wasn't your typical case of a weapon being slightly underpowered. Its release sparked a huge debate that touched on everything: the game's excellent balance, the developers' design choices, and the very complicated relationship between a game and its paying players. It became a story about value, about comfort, and a community trying to define what it wants from a game it loves. And the catalyst for this entire story was one creator's very blunt assessment of a single
Oh boy, he's gonna go in on Smack?
premium item. When the content creator Gacha Smack released his evaluation of Augusta's new signature weapon, he didn't just dislike it, he called it, quote, the worst investment he has ever made in Wuthering Waves.
Oh
his
boy.
frustration, however, stemmed from a deeper issue than the weapon just being weak. In his view, it was a fundamental
Augusta's weapon is not weak? What?
mentally bad product. When the community started
Okay.
crunching the numbers, the data backed up his initial feelings. The weapon offered a tiny less than 10% damage increase over other much more
Okay, hold on. So here's the thing.
bad
Hold
product.
on.
When the community started crunching the numbers, the data backed up his initial feelings. The weapon offered
I would understand, personally, this is my take. I would understand if the community was crunching the numbers of Augusta's weapon, a premium weapon, to a standard banner weapon or a 4-star, and this was the results that they got, right? If they were comparing Augusta's weapon to a standard banner weapon and there was only like a 5% difference, then I would understand. If they were comparing Augusta's premium weapon to like a 4-star weapon and there was only like a 4, 5, 10% difference in damage, I would understand a certain group of people being mad, because at the end of the day, you are choosing to pull for this weapon and it's a premium weapon, so you're expecting premium damage. But when you're comparing a premium weapon of the same typing, of the same type of buffs, to another premium weapon of the same typing and of the same type of buffs, I kind of understand that there are going to be certain scenarios where this type of situation will happen, right? I know that you'd want her to have a very unique weapon to where it just absolutely craps on everything, but the reality of it is that in Wuwa there are weapon types and there are damage types. If all of those things align, if you have a weapon that's a broad blade, another weapon that's a broad blade, and both of them deal heavy attack damage, it's going to be really hard for there to be such a giant discrepancy, like a 20-30% damage difference, because at that point I feel that it would just be a power creep that would be a little bit too much. I do understand the point of wanting this weapon to be, you know, that much better than all the other options, but if you take out Verdant Summit from the equation, once again another premium weapon, and you take this weapon out of the equation and you compare Augusta's weapon to the next best in slot weapon, then we start seeing a little bit of a difference. We start seeing maybe a 15-20% damage difference from the second best option that is not a premium weapon. So you know what I mean? I feel that Augusta's weapon is exactly where it needs to be, and this was just a case scenario where they just you know, complemented each other pretty damn well. They worked together pretty damn well. And unlike weapons nowadays, back in the day, weapons like Yinlin and weapons like Gion were a lot more universal than they are nowadays. So, you know, I feel that that was a little bit of a wrong take from the community's behalf.
For a tiny less than 10% damage increase over other much more accessible options, specifically the weapon introduced over a year ago, and that is GN's signature weapon. For a premium item that can cost $100 or more, that is not a small difference. It is a rounding error. You are paying the price of a brand new game for a performance boost you would probably never even notice. Beyond the stats, the weapon was just clunky. It felt bad to use. It was designed to be paired with her new gear set, the Crown of Valor, but the two parts didn't work well together. The weapon's main buff lasted for 7 seconds, while the Echo's buff only lasted for 4. It is like trying to drive a car where the gas pedal and the engine are completely.
Yeah, I will say I do get annoyed by characters nowadays because they have such small windows to optimize their damage as opposed to characters back in the day. I could be mistaken on this take right here, but if I'm not wrong, Zhang Liao's buff lasts a lot longer than characters nowadays. A lot of the characters nowadays will have like a 5-second, 10-second, 8-second buff, and then you compare it with other buffs like this. For example, you compare her weapon buff with her echo set buff, yada yada yada, and it starts feeling like you're having to mid-max and optimize your rotations in such a way that you're actively sweating to be able to get your damage out, because they're cutting down the time. A good example of this was Zani. When Zani was in the beta test, her buff lasted a lot longer. For some reason, the devs decided to cut down the time of the buff, and that same pattern has been applying to a lot of these other characters down the line. And I'm not saying that, you know, we should care about what the beta is going through, but as we've seen lately, the beta hasn't really been putting out the content we'd want them to, with things like Augusta and her performance in Whimpering Waste. So maybe certain things, even if they're in the beta or their final release, should be questioned just a little bit more. And those short times on these buffs are definitely annoying, bro.
Out of sync. You end up constantly fighting for your own equipment just to make it do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that is just anti-synergistic design, where parts that should work together actively work against each other. So you have a premium product with negligible performance gain that is also frustrating to use. It failed to make the character meaningfully stronger, nor did it make her more fun to play. From his perspective, it was a comprehensive failure of design. But to understand why this one weapon sparked such a huge debate, you have to look at the game it exists in, an ecosystem that until this point had been praised for getting almost everything right. And that is not an exaggeration. For the most part, Wuthering Waves has maintained a level of balance that is almost unheard of in this genre. The biggest issue in any gacha game is power creep, when new characters are so much stronger than the old ones that your previous investments become useless.
I feel that applies a lot more to characters than it does to weapons. A great example is Yinlin. Yinlin is absolute currently, and sorry to tell you this, Yinlin mains, but Yinlin is currently bottom of the barrel, probably one of the worst characters in all of Wuthering Waves, whereas her weapon still holds out as one of the most high value rectifiers and overall weapons in the entirety of the game. So there are going to be case scenarios where certain weapons hold out the test of times. For example, Augusta, her weapon might be very specific to her, and later down the line there might be other broadsword weapon users. But you know, who knows? Maybe a year from now they'll release another heavy broadsword shield stacking DPS that has a broadsword that compares to Augusta, and they're going to be, you know, 5-10% difference in damage. Eventually those type of things will happen, because weapons have more longevity than the characters themselves.
Results in a treadmill, where players have to keep spending, keep pulling the new characters just to keep up. Gacha Smack himself contrasted this with games like Honkai Star Rail, which he pointed to as an example of where this kind of aggressive power creep can become a serious problem. In that game, for instance, new damage-dealing characters are often released with a significant vertical leap in power. The arrival of new units often set a completely new standard for damage, making launch-era characters characters feel noticeably weaker in comparison. Not to mention the endgame being tuned around the newer characters, it doesn't really help. It is a model that can make players feel like their old investments are becoming obsolete, pressuring them to pull for the new, stronger units just to keep up. But in Wuthering Waves, a full year after its launch has mostly avoided this. Characters from day one like Verena, Mordefi, Sanhua are still considered top tier. They're often the best choice for the job, which respects the time and effort players have put in. The other side of that coin is a game's focus on skill. In Wuthering Waves, winning has always been more about learning the fights, dodging the attacks, and playing your characters well. Your wallet cannot dodge for you, and that is why some whales in the game still struggle with endgame content.
Shout out to Sus, he's one of them, bro. One of my boys, bro. Homie Wales has S6R5, but he still can comp.
This W player-friendly system, however, leads to a central paradox. If the game is so well balanced that you don't need to spend money to beat it, then why would anyone ever buy a premium weapon? Also, by the way, if you enjoy videos like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
Y'all heard him, chat. If y'all enjoy my reactions and my take on some of these videos y'all sent me, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, and drop a comment on the goddamn video. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Oftentimes, you guys have takes that are just as good as mine, if not better. So let me know in the comment section below.
Goal is to reach 50K before the month ends, so any support you show is very great.
And go sub up to Glaive. He's trying to get a 50K, bro.
Greatly appreciated. What is the purpose of a $100 luxury item in an ecosystem that doesn't require it? To answer that question, you have to look at the community, which has already drawn its own lines in the sand. First, consider a weapon called the Stringless. This weapon is almost universally loved by the player base. The reason is simple. It offered incredible value through both its strengths and its flexibility. You can put it on almost any character of that weapon type and it would perform beautifully. It was a single investment that made your entire account better. A perfect example of a player-friendly item. And then there was Frolova's signature weapon. The reaction was a complete opposite. Players were angry and they were worried. This weapon wasn't a minor upgrade over the free-to-play options. At its peak, it was a staggering 43% stronger than the free-to-play option.
And that's honestly going to happen because the more they introduce unique mechanics to unique characters, it's going to be really hard for all of these other weapons to work with them. And on top of that, if they introduce a character that has some unique mechanics, or at least brand new mechanics into the game, all the previous weapons might not perform, you know, on par with the brand new mechanic. Eventually down the line, as more things, you know, get introduced with this brand new mechanic, maybe the new weapon will become the String Master, right? But as new mechanics get introduced, there will eventually always be this brand new weapon that sets the standard for that specific character and characters of the sort moving forward.
App that big isn't a luxury anymore. It is your mom's legs. It is a threat. It felt less like an optional upgrade and more like a mandatory component that you had to buy. This was the first time it truly seemed like the game's famous balance was at risk, the kind of aggressive power creep people had feared. This fear also extends beyond fairness, touching on the risk of the game becoming stale. The creator Brand Online made this exact point in a video about a different game, Genshin Impact, arguing that a lack of challenge for veteran players can make the entire gameplay loop feel empty. These two examples show a clear pattern. The community loves a weapon that is flexible and offers broad value, but it rejects one that creates a massive, almost insurmountable power gap. Players aren't asking for a signature weapon to be weak, they are asking for them to be balanced. A good choice, not the only choice. The community then has a clear idea of what it doesn't want: weapons on either extreme of the power scale.
Okay, so once again, I feel that this is a little bit extreme. I do agree with Frolova's weapon being an absolute power, you know, boost to Frolova because of its mechanics synergizing so well with Frolova and there being no real other options that gave that. But I don't feel that Augusta's new weapon is that bad, right? I don't feel that Augusta's new weapon is negligible strength. I don't feel that it's downright to the point where it's just dog shit. The reality of it is that we're comparing, I guess, something similar, a brand new character with shield stacking to a character with a new mechanic here as well. And we could compare, you know, String Master to Gion's weapon as well, but this was just one of those case scenarios where Gion's weapon fit Augusta like a shoe, whereas String Master didn't really fit for Lova's mechanics as good as Gion. But still, if you don't have Gion's weapon, the reality of it is you would want to go for Augusta's weapon, because when we compare Augusta's weapon to the next best option, not counting Gion, there's a big gap. On top of that, we're at the point that if you're going to get Augusta, are you really going to wait for a Gion rerun to get his weapon, or would you rather just get Augusta's?
This makes the true nature of the original complaint even more interesting, because the core issue, as it turns out, was never really about the numbers. In a later conversation with another creator, St. Tontas, Gacha Smack clarified his position, and what he said reframes this entire debate. He said that when he pays for a signature weapon, what he's really looking for is comfort. The weapon should solve a problem for the player, not introduce a new one. He pointed to other weapons in the game that have simple, powerful effects that just work. You equip them, play the character normally, and you get the benefit without any extra homework. Augusta's weapon did the exact opposite. Instead of making her easier to play, it forced you into one single rigid rotation. If you deviated from that perfect sequence of moves even slightly, your performance would just fall off a cliff. It is not a comfort, it is a straitjacket. It locks you into one playstyle and punishes you for trying anything else. And this is where the economic...
I don't know that take too much. I don't know exactly what they mean by that take. I feel that with Augusta, you could have a multitude of rotations to effectively get the buffs from her weapon. Sure, there's going to be an optimized rotation, but you don't necessarily got to be, you know, hard locked to only doing that rotation to get the buffs from her weapon.
Argument comes in. He argued that some weapons in the game are flexible.
Yes.
You can use them on many different characters.
Yes, and that is absolutely true. But we've also been deviating from this for a long time now, not just on weapons, but characters, right? A lot of the OG weapons would fit on multiple characters. Think of weapons like Gion's weapon, Yin Lin's weapon. Think of a weapon like Shang Li's weapon. All of these weapons were like, they're almost a year old, if not older than a year by now, and they can still be used on many characters. But as time has progressed, because of the fact, I feel like, that people would often say, I don't need to get this new rectifier because I have Yinlin's weapon. Oh, I don't really get this sword because I have Shang Li's weapon. Kuro has gone down the path of making weapons more and more specific. And that's not just Augusta's or Furlova's. This can apply to a lot of different weapons. Weapons like Brandt is not as specific, but up to this day, you really only want to use it on Brandt. A weapon like Cardathea is good, but you only really use it on Cardathea. You don't really want to use it on nobody else. And the same goes for characters. We got a character like Shorekeeper, which was amazing. You can slot it into absolutely every team. And if we look after that, every other support has been a lot more, you know, strict and personalized to every single team. You have characters like Siakona, Peebs, Lupa, Yuno, which are all being pretty much tailor-made to support or pair with another character. So while yes, this is true, some weapons are flexible and you can use them on many different characters, we gotta just accept the fact and at least acknowledge, maybe not accept it and just swallow it, but at least acknowledge the fact that Kuro has been making every unit and every weapon a lot more character specific, team specific, instead of making them usable on a lot of people,
giving them broad value. Augusta's weapon is not like that. It is a niche weapon, meaning it is only really good for her. When an expensive item is only useful for one character, it absolutely has to deliver a massive spike in either performance or comfort to be worth that price. In fact, Gacha Smack even offered an alternative to a pure power spike, stating that he would actively prefer aesthetic power creep, meaning he would be rather if the value came from the weapon being cosmetically superior and looking incredible, rather than just having bigger damage numbers. So when you put it all together, the weapon provides no significant power boost, it makes the character less comfortable to play, and it has no value outside of that one character. From that perspective, its entire value proposition completely collapses. This complex, multi-layered failure is what elevates a simple bad weapon into a much larger conversation. But before we get to that larger conversation, it is worth asking, if the creator's final point was this nuanced, why was the initial reaction so hostile? Was it a simple overreaction from the community? And the truth is, the confusion was perfectly valid. Remember the context, okay? The community had just pushed back against a weapon for being too strong, and then this new critique was about a weapon being too weak. The immediate logical assumption for many was that he was advocating for the very power creep they had just rejected. His most sophisticated points about comfort and flexibility didn't surface until much later, after opinions had already hardened, and then came to the second video, which escalated things dramatically. The discussion shifted from a product critique to broad personal insults aimed at the player base. And at that point, the backlash was no longer about a weapon, it was a predictable response to being attacked. So now, does that mean no one overreacted? Of course not. In the noise, the original valid critique of Augusta's weapon as a poorly designed product got lost, and online discourse inevitably leads to a dog pile, where some will join in without the full story. But this
See, here's the thing, bro. I understood where Smack was coming from, right? Not saying I agreed or disagreed. I understood where he was coming from, but the reality of it is there was several places where a lot of people were disagreeing with, and I'll tell you guys why. So the original problem was that Augusta's weapon didn't really provide that big of an increase to another weapon. The first problem was the other weapon was also a limited banner weapon, right? One being a universal weapon, the other one being a very specific weapon. That was the biggest problem. And the second problem was that a lot of people are getting told to not pull for Gion because he's kind of mid. A lot of people are brand new players that could have started recently, maybe with Augusta, maybe with 2.0. And even though there have been some Gion reruns, why pull for Gion when his rerun was happening when you could have pulled for Cardathea, which was, I believe, a little bit later, but was the much better and brand new shiny Arrow character. So a lot of people don't have Gion's weapon. So since they didn't have Gion's weapon, they didn't really run into this particular issue where it was like, yo, why pull for Augusta's weapon if I have Gion's weapon? But if I compare Augusta's weapon to every other option, I'm still seeing the same 20-25% damage gap that I'm used to seeing from other weapons outside of Frolova, which was a much bigger gap, and that's why players were mad. So I feel that the context from both parties was kind of there, but the lack of conversation and the fact that a lot of people online be hopping on to rage without actually thinking why some people say some things was what created this like clash between creators and the community.
The situation was less of an unprompted overreaction and more of a perfect storm of mixed messaging, escalating rhetoric, and a community already sensitive to the
A perfect storm of mixed messages. That was beautifully put right there.
Topic at hand. This entire cycle of critique and confusion is what put the game and its developers at a critical crossroads. And in the end, that is what this was really about. The controversy around Augusta's weapon was never just about one piece of gear. It was a stress test. It put the entire design philosophy of Wuthering Waves and its relationship with its community under a microscope. What that microscope revealed is the impossible balance that developers in this space have to strike, and the fundamental, often contradictory desires of a modern gacha audience. On one hand, players who spend real money want to feel like their investment was worth it. They want their purchase to feel impactful and rewarding. At the same time, the entire community, spenders included, fears anything that threatens the delicate balance that makes the game fair and fun for everyone. The community, therefore, ends up in this strange position where it critiques one weapon for being too weak and another for being too strong. They are asking developers to hit a target that is almost invisibly small. This leads to a deep contradiction that developers have to face. The most vocal parts of the community on social media will condemn the massive power gaps, but sales data across the industry often shows that the banners for these overpowered characters are the ones that are making the most money. This leaves developers with a difficult question. Do you listen to the vocal minority who advocates for game health, or do you cater to the silent majority whose spending habits rewards power? And that is the final takeaway here. The line between a satisfying luxury item and a game-breaking necessity is a razor-thin line. How Kuro Games responds to this feedback to this entire episode will likely define Wuthering Waves' identity for years to come. Will it continue to be the game that prioritizes that incredible player-friendly balance it was praised for, or will it slowly start to slide towards the financial pressures that always demand for more power? The answer to that will shape the future of the game, and I'm curious of what you all
I'm gonna be honest, low key, this was a pretty damn good video, right? I gotta be honest regarding this whole topic. It's such a hard thing for developers to drop a weapon that, when compared to its next best in slot premium weapon, you still have a 20% damage increase. Because if they do that, then the third option, which would normally be a standard banner weapon or a 4-star, would see like a 40% increase in difference or a 35% increase in damage. And that's where people start to complain. So it's really hard. Like, I understand the points from, you know, creators like Smack, where they were wanting a little bit more power. But if you compare Augusta, and I could probably pull up Pride Win, but if you compare Augusta, let's see if I could see this right here. Yeah, there we go. Let's compare this real quick, right? Boom. Right here. If we compare Augusta's Thunderflame Dominion, right, at 128.3% damage, to the next best in slot option, which is Verdant Summit, you only see an 8% increase. But let's say you never got any of these three, right, premium weapons, because we have to keep into account that not everybody's going to have other premium weapons. If you take out all of these premium weapons from the you know, conversation, we already have a 28% increase in damage from the standard banner weapon. When you're comparing premium weapons, seeing an increase in, like, you know, 24% from Thunderflame to Wildmark, or, you know, 20% from Aegis to Thunderflame, like, this is normal. This seems normal to me, right? You see 20 here, and as you go up, these weapons start getting closer and closer to Augusta's very specific playstyle. So let's say they would have made it so the difference between Verdant Summit and Thunderflare Dominion was, instead of 8%, it was 18%. We're now talking about a gigantic leap between Thunderflare Dominion and Lustra's Razor. We're talking about a giant gap between this weapon and even this weapon. We would be talking about 35 to 40% difference if you didn't have Verdant Summit, and that's what's going to be really hard for developers to specifically manage. While maybe some people were a little bit, you know, downplayed by this particular difference only being 8%, I still think it was good, right? Maybe it could have been 10%, and that would have been a little bit better, but I personally don't see this as a problem. As someone that S6'd R5 their Augusta because I loved it, you'd figure I'd be a little bit more mad about the fact that a Verdant Summit to a Thunderflare Dominion is such a small difference, but I think this right here, this increase is logical. Now, if it was like a 40% increase, it would be a problem. If Verdant Summit was better than Thunderflare Dominion, it would be a problem. Or if there was no difference, if this was 120 and this was 120, then I would understand. But other than that, I don't think it was bad. I think this is actually pretty fair. And there are going to be scenarios where a weapon casually fits another character so damn well that it's just going to be such a small case scenario. But this is not what we're finding every single time. Just like the case with Frolova is not what we're finding every single time, but the odd cases of this type of numbers happening will happen. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Thank y'all for watching. Appreciate y'all. If you've enjoyed it, let me know in the comment section below. If you agree, disagree, or have your own thoughts, drop a comment. For now, hit that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.